All right, could y'all mute me 1 second? So,
All right. Welcome to Keith Church. We're glad that you're here tonight. If you haven't already, there is coffee over here, fresh brewed coffee, and some cold bottles of water. And at the back table, we have some delicious treats. So you can help yourselves to those things at this time. We're here in a moment. We're going to have Chris Edwards come up. He is the regional director for, let me see if I can get it right, Chris, Tennessee Suicide Network for Suicide Prevention. Is that right? I got it scrambled. Prevention Network. All right. And we're so glad that he's here. He actually came into contact with me the week after Tucker Swafford took his own life. And he was a good friend to me on the phone and immediately gave me a lot of great pointers as to what I could be doing. And I wanted to partner with him and put this on. And since Tucker's death, there have been many more suicides in our community that have wrecked through people's families, church communities, work communities, things like that. And I appreciate everybody in the room coming here, whether you are someone who has been affected personally by suicide or not. What we're going to learn about tonight means that we are all in this together, and we all have a role to play. And so thank you for being here tonight. And that's probably not the best intro, Chris, but give him a big round of applause, okay?
Well, greetings, everyone. Technical difficulties to start the bad off, so that's all right. Thank you, first of all, for being here. Thank you for seeing the need to have such an event. It is a great honor for me to be here to share with you all a very sensitive subject, but a subject that is very dear to many of our hearts, and it has touched many of our lives in this room. If anything you hear tonight triggers you, makes you think bad thoughts or feel negative, painful feelings, know that that is natural and okay to feel those thoughts and feelings. This is a very heavy topic. It's hard to talk about, and there's a lot of stigma attached to the word suicide. But we're going to lean in together, and we're going to talk about something that's hard to talk about. At the end of the night, we're going to realize it's okay to talk about it, and there's help. We're in this together. There's resources. There are people out here that are experts that can help in trying times. And ultimately, we're in this together. And lastly, maybe this can serve as a seed, as a first beam on building a bridge. See, we're the church. But then you got mental health. Historically, they're kind of far apart, right? We got mental health world, we got the church world, and there's not a lot of crossover. My hope is tonight that we see there can be some crossover, and that your faith, our faith, my faith is the foundation on learning how to engage such a tragedy. As Pastor Mark said, I'm Chris. I love McMinn County. I'm from Hamilton County, a couple counties below, so don't judge me too bad. I'm a Chattanooga boy, born and raised. But I love McMinn County. I cover 10 counties with TSPN, and I'm also an Army Reserve chaplain, and my reserve unit's up in Knoxville. So I love Tennessee, born and raised here. Got into suicide prevention because I served as an associate pastor for around 10 years. And it was a great time, challenging time. And it made me realize, man, there was a lot of days where, maybe I bring a good word, but there was a lot of days where I didn't know what to do. If I'm honest, when it comes to mental health issues, it was scary, it was challenging. And when I was a new believer, can I share a little bit of my story with you all? Is that all right? When I was a new believer, when I had just given my life to Christ, I was like, awesome. This is amazing. New life. The greatest decision I ever made was loving life. I had that fire for the Lord. You ever been around a new believer? They just had that fire for the Lord, right? They might be a little dumb sometimes, but they had that fire, right? That's where I was at. I was just had the zeal. So at my church, we had a breakdancing ministry. Dead serious. And I really couldn't breakdance that much, but I tried. So I connected with the young man on the screen, Cody. I was 22 at the time, 21. He was 18, just about to turn 19. We connected. A couple weeks later, he was on house arrest. I'm like, all right, that's no big deal. I'll come to your house and we'll break dance in your back patio. So we did that. I brought the boombox with CDs. We talked about God. We talked about girls. We talked about life. It was good. We did that about every week. He seemed pretty upbeat. He was on house arrest. It was planning to be maybe a year, something like that. But he seemed pretty upbeat. I didn't know to look for any type of signs, anything. I thought he was good to go. So we did that for a few months. And then his mom called me in hysterics on a Friday night. I was discipling Cody. He was under my charge. And the sounds his mom made weren't something you want to hear ever. Cody had taken his own life. And if I'm honest, you know what my first thoughts were? I failed. I let him down. How could I not know? I was discipling him. I was around him every week. I didn't see a single thing. It's my fault. I screwed up. I let him down. I let his mom down. That's where my mind went to. And I carried a lot of shame with that for much longer than I should have. I thought it was my fault. I thought that I should have, could have done something. It was a long time until I realized through counseling, through deepening my faith in the Lord, it wasn't my fault. Woo! It's a tough pill to swallow when you're close to someone, right? It wasn't my fault. See, that's part of that taboo when it comes to talking about suicide. It's real complicated when it comes to the emotions we feel inside, the thoughts we think, and wanting to engage this topic. How do we talk about it? We kind of shy away from it, like, oh, I don't know, I can't talk about this. And I dare say our great enemy when it comes to suicide prevention and hope and progress and care and resources and spreading that hope and care and resources is one word: stigma. Does anybody have a good definition you'd like to shout out? Well, what is stigma? Could anyone enlighten us? What is stigma? Negative connotation. Awesome. Thank you very much. It was bold to speak out here. It's good stuff. Negative connotation. Anything else that you'd like to add what stigma is? If you Google, I Google words all the time. I'm weird like that. I like to find out what things mean. If you Google the definition of stigma, a mark of disgrace. That's pretty serious. But that when someone is struggling with suicidal ideation, when they're thinking thoughts, having plans to take their own life, thinking there's no hope, they feel that mark of disgrace on their soul. But we may not be able to detect it easily. In some trainings we offer, like QPR, you learn how to determine some of these factors, some of these small ways someone may give a tell. Like if you're playing cards and somebody has a tell, that's how it can be sometimes. So with the Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network, we're a network. We're here to save lives in Tennessee. Through partnerships, through resources, through training, through support, through outreach. Our history was all the way back in the 90s. There was a need, and in the 90s, you really didn't talk about suicide. Many of you may remember that it was just viewed as disgraceful, weakness. It was a terrible thing. We couldn't talk about it. And that still is present to some degrees today. But we were founded to have this grassroots network to bring mental health experts, counselors, therapists, researchers, pastors, volunteers in the community, bring these people together to link up and say, hey, what can we do? And now we've grown. We cover all 96 counties in Tennessee, and we have a lot of great partner agencies. That's one of the cool things about TSPN. But we're still relatively unknown. Who's heard of TSPN before tonight? Anybody? I find that a bit ironic because that's how suicide is. We don't want to talk about it until a bad day occurs. So the way we're structured, which is kind of unique, we have an advisory council, interstate departmental groups, and regional networks. So I'm over the Southeast Regional Network, and what that means is we're tasked with partnering with churches, with nonprofits, with manufacturing agencies. Think of like a net, spreading a net out and connecting with people, with school systems, with colleges, and helping destigmatize the topic and bring resources and hope to the forefront. Our advisory council members are state appointed, governor appointed mental health experts to help guide regional directors like myself on what we're doing, assessing how we're doing, and attempting to make the strongest impact possible. And then all these intrastate departmental groups. I'm going to reference something a little bit more in a minute, but we started a faith-based task force specifically designed to empower churches and pastors and volunteers and ministry leaders, lay leaders, to not just passively sit by, but to engage suicide prevention by building on the foundation of faith. This isn't meant to replace faith. It's meant to form this bridge, right? So with these networks, these regional networks that we've formed, there are a lot of crossover, but there's also a lot of unique dynamics. Something we struggle with a little bit more in McMinn County versus, say, Davidson County, where Nashville is. Can anybody say what our struggle is here in McMinn County versus Davidson County and Nashville? Does anybody have any thoughts on how we struggle a little bit differently? Do what? Income? Rural? Less resources? Yeah, those are definitely it. And being born and raised in Southeast Tennessee, I would say stigma is a little bit higher in East Tennessee. So we have some challenges, but that doesn't mean we can't provide hope, we can't provide resources. That's just the unique challenge that we have in our county. So I like to take an honest look at our challenges. Instead of burying it under the rug, we can look and say, all right, these are our challenges, but what can we do about them? Tonight is an amazing example on overcoming that challenge. So what we do, all free, because we're grant funded, we have trainings, presentations, resources, literature, awareness events. So what that looks like is, say here at Keith Memorial UMC, you have a stack of brochures that could be handed out. Or say staff could be trained in a QPR, question, persuade, refer. Or say there is a place to create dialogue for youth group of creating more awareness of the topic and allowing dialogue to occur. Those are some ways that can make a powerful impact. And notice, it's not just one person. It's an us issue. We're all in this together, and we're all partners in providing hope. So when it comes to suicide, let's look at three aspects. A lot of people, when I tell people what I do for a living, they immediately think I'm in a call center taking calls 24/7. That's a pretty common thing. Oh, you work in suicide prevention? It must be hard taking all the calls. Well, that's intervention. We're the Suicide Prevention Network. So our focus is to prevent suicides. And frankly, it all does roll back to prevention, whether you're talking about a postvention, which this is kind of a little bit of both. We're still new with some tragedies, so there's an element of postvention, but this is still considered a prevention, an awareness event. But when it comes to intervention, we partner with Mobile Crisis and with the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is now a new 3-digit number. Does anyone in here know what the new mental health emergency number is? It's not 911, but what is it? 811. I think that's if you're digging, you don't want to hit pipes. That's close. What? Anybody know? Oh, that's close. 899. I wanted to see how good the advertising has been. Uh, we still got a ways to go, and we just got released from our state agency that we're under to actually start advertising. Historically, you could dial 911 and still can if there is a crisis situation. If an individual has a weapon and they're saying they want to harm themselves, kill themselves, harm others, you can still dial 911. That's probably the better option. But if someone you're just talking to and they say, really sad, really depressed, I want to take my own life, 988 is a option. And what that looks like, you dial 988, it calls forwards to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So that's how that system is working. There's still some bugs to be worked out on it, but it's a call forwarding. But it's real easy to remember, 988. That is the number that you can now refer individuals to. It works for veterans, for civilians. So that is a powerful resource when you feel way over your head, like, I don't know what to do. This is too much. I'm lost. I don't know what to do. Call a crisis intervention expert. And then on postventions, there are ways that is handled, but it's very tricky because every situation is different. You ever went to a funeral? You don't have to raise your hand on this. You ever went to a funeral and it was kind of uncomfortable, and the family maybe didn't want to talk about some things, and it's hard to provide care when stigma is so potent. Nonetheless, we have survivors of suicide loss groups. We have a crisis intervention team that can actually come in and provide postvention services right after a tragedy. So these are some ways that it's not just on one person. I could not in a million years do all of these things, but it is an us collaborative venture that can. Task forces and initiatives. There are two, the third from the bottom, if you look at BMMP and faith-based initiative. BMMP and faith-based initiative. So we are literally the byproducts of these two task forces. So BMMP, Bradley, Meigs, McMinn, and Polk counties. This is a big part of Tim Tatum. If y'all don't know him, he's an awesome guy. He's been in mental health over 20 years. This was his brainchild. He really knew and wanted to provide more care to more individuals in his county. He lives in Polk County, so he cares deeply about every citizen of these counties. And he saw there needs to be more things done to help out in these underserved counties. And then this faith-based initiative. We had our kickoff meeting with Dr. Monty Burks. He's the director of the faith-based division of Tennessee Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. Awesome man of God. We're starting that to really drill in and help and love on churches to help have more support. So these things deeply matter to me personally, especially veterans. Veterans have a high degree of stigma. They pack their own rucksack. They're supposed to have it all together. They're supposed to bear the weight by themselves. Transversely, youth in church youth groups have a similar degree of stigma. Well, I'm a Christian. I'm not supposed to be suicidal. It's almost it's embarrassing to even have a struggle because we're not supposed to. And that's okay to have those thoughts. But know that you're not alone, and know that sometimes the weight's too much to bear by yourself. This is what we're doing tonight. We are bridging faith-based and evidence-based care. Did anybody read the passage of scripture that was on the post on the Facebook page for tonight's event? Anybody read that scripture? Yes, ma'am. Pastor did back there. Well, I thought it was quite fitting. I'm gonna read the passage that was attached to the post. 2 Corinthians 1. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the Father of mercies, and the God of all comfort. He comforts us in all our afflictions, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any kind of affliction, through the comfort we ourselves receive from God. Woo! Amen. Notice right there, we're comforted, so we can then comfort others. We're not just comforted to then, you got your problems, you're good, I don't want to deal with it. We're supposed to love on each other and put our arms around each other in all our affliction. I wonder who believes mental health struggles would fall in that definition of affliction. What about suicidal ideation? What about losing someone to suicide? All comfort. God of all comfort in our affliction. So if He has all comfort, we can rely on Him as our foundation. You know, I love the South. I love the South. I love our cooking. I love collard greens. We got some collard greens in Stigma, let's be honest. Anybody ever heard this one? God won't give you more than you can bear. There's some grandmas that are awesome. Awesome ladies of faith. I've heard that said. Wait a minute. So wait, God won't give us one. Let's just scroll down to verse 8. That same passage, one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible about suicide. Verse 8, we don't want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, of our affliction that took place in Asia. We were completely overwhelmed beyond our strength, so that we even despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had already received the death sentence. So that we would not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead. He has delivered us from such a terrible death, and He will deliver us. We have put our hope in Him, that He will deliver us again, while you join in helping us by your prayers. Then many will give thanks on our behalf for the gift that came to us through the prayers of many. Whew. We were overwhelmed beyond our strength. You know, back to my story with Cody. When his mom was sobbing and talking to me, I felt overwhelmed in that moment. I felt like a failure, but yet I was entrusted to care for her. I didn't know how to do that. I felt very ill-equipped and ashamed, if I'm honest. I was overwhelmed beyond my strength in that caregiving capacity in that moment. But you know what? We leaned into the Lord. I listened. We prayed. We read Scripture together. We talked. Faith is our foundation. And then when we learn tools on how to determine if someone is suicidal, then when we find out about resources that we can pass the ball off to on crisis interventions, we realize we can be overwhelmed at times. Anybody ever felt overwhelmed in this room? You felt like it was more than you could bear. Like, God, I don't know what to do. Help. I can't handle this. It's too much. We felt like the result that we're in the midst of, that we're experiencing, was too much. That's where we go back to our faith. I've got an exercise I'd like us to do. Can anybody stand up for me? No cheating, all right? So no touching your chair. I want everybody to balance on one foot. And when you wobble and touch down, have a seat. 3, 2, 1, go. If you wiggle and touch down, have a seat. Man, y'all have some good coping skills. Y'all are pretty tough. You're hanging in there. When life gets troubled and you feel out of whack, out of balance, what are we supposed to do? All right, y'all sit down. Can't grab each other yet. All right, any hop. If you make one little wiggle and you hop, you got to sit down. Look at the front row. These are the high achievers right here. All right. Notice, when we're on our little spiritual island, I got this all together. I'm good. I can handle everything. I don't need any support. I got this. I'm good. No, thank you. I don't need your help. We can fall, can't we? How's the scripture go? We're to bear one another's afflictions, burdens. All right, let's stand up again. So now, everyone on the end, I want you to stand on your outside foot. Lift your inside foot. Everybody that's on the end. So I want everybody to link up, okay? Everybody to link up, arms around each other. And now, let's try it again. That's right. If you're solo, you got to find support somewhere. Look at this structure. It's almost like we're a local church congregation coming together and supporting each other. Man, look at that. Hey. All right, you can have a seat now. How much more stable did y'all feel? And guess what? I have a secret weapon in my back pocket. I'm not here alone. I have some of my partners with me in the back. So I'm not here alone, even organizationally. So we have Lynn. She's a therapist with Helen Ross McNabb here locally. If you need a therapist, we have Lynn. That's amazing here in Athens. Helen Ross McNabb here supporting because she does what I cannot do. We have Mental Health Association of East Tennessee. Sarah Mann, she's here. They do amazing work with youth and create their own courses. We have Be the Change Youth Initiative with Deirdre and Sydney that work exclusively with youth and have an amazing story on their journey, talking with churches across the nation on how they work with youth. And lastly, we're coming together and we're forming a panel on the 15th of September, Youth Mental Health in the Church, specifically gauging how are we doing? Are we supporting youth? Is the church a safe place to talk about mental health struggles? Are pastors equipped to handle the rigors of mental health struggles with youth? So we've got progress. But this bridge is really important because it all hinges. If you have faith in Christ, let that be your foundation and build upon it. It's not a and or this versus that. There's no magic bullets in suicide prevention training. Think of them as tools. You sharpen your axe, you're more effective. You craft your listening ear, your seeing eyes to see things that you didn't see before. So we've passed legislation, the Tennessee Higher Education Bill, which is really cool, that requires all higher education institutions to have a prevention, intervention, and postvention suicide plan in place. I know, it's upsetting when we don't have what we need. The innocence of children, it's an amazing thing. But this is legislation to help, sometimes force, school systems to get it together and have some plans in place, have some more training going on. So I'm going to show you some numbers and statistics. It may be really sad to look at. That's okay. We can lean in together. Sometimes we have to look at the ugly monster to bring hope to it, to stop it. 1,220 suicide deaths reported in Tennessee in 2020. Accidental deaths, don't count on that. Overdoses, don't count on that. Though there's a case to be made that many or most of those could be construed as suicide deaths. These are not individuals with suicide plans. These are not individuals who had a suicidal thought, who are currently having suicidal thoughts with intentions and plans. These are suicide deaths. It's too many. You know, we're doing worse than the national average when it comes to our rate of suicide deaths. So we're actually on a state resource level, I think we're way ahead of the curve. But on the struggle, we're way below where we need to be. So if you look at this top left, I know it may be hard to see. The second leading cause of death in Tennessee for individuals, for children, 10 to 14, is suicide. That's an atrocity. That's terrible. Same for individuals 25 to 34 who have just graduated college in many instances, and they're supposed to have all this joy and vibrance, yet feel the crippling weight of debt and depression. And then if you mitigate that to 10 to 19-year-olds, it's the third leading cause of death in Tennessee. It's hard to think about, hard to look at. It doesn't make any sense, does it? How could this be? If we don't look at that monster, it just keeps going under the rug. But if we make suicide an acceptable topic to talk about, and our challenge is, if any of you have been in the faith for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, if you've been in the faith, if you're a pillar in your church, maybe it would be a good idea to study your Bible and find instances of maybe David as a 20-year war veteran with extreme PTSD who's struggling with suicidal ideation. You might find some Psalms and how you can live that out and point others back to this struggle isn't foreign. It's in our Bibles. The struggle of suicide has been there for thousands of years. Firearms are the number one instrument used, but we're not anti-gun. There's too many veterans, too many 2A advocates here in the South. We're all about responsible gun ownership. If you want to get better, you go to the range. If you want to develop a safety plan, how would you store your firearms if you yourself are struggling with suicidal ideation? Have you put that plan together? Those are some good principles to install on having a mental health safety plan. And lastly, the rate did not increase. Okay, that's a good thing. The rate of suicide deaths. What we have seen, the rate of individuals texting 741-741. You text TN to 741-741. If you're a teenager, that is typically the way you're going to go. Instead of calling in, you text TN to 741-741. And what happens, that data is tracked of this quantity. We're receiving the most texts, most calls ever before. But that's actually a good thing. People are like, okay, I'm struggling, maybe I should reach out. So I would say that is a great thing to have more calls coming in. We need more money to support, more infrastructure to support. So we have different trainings. So if you want to get involved and you want to sharpen that tool belt, you want to learn how you can make a difference, how you can be a leader and maybe see some signs, hear some word tracks. Because maybe that's happened. You're like, oh, that doesn't sound right. You can learn what to do with it and learn that it's not all on your shoulders. We offer a plethora of trainings. QPR is our bread and butter. That's 1 to 2 hours. And think of it like CPR, but for mental health. Now, if you do CPR on somebody, you're not going to keep them at your house. You're going to send them to the hospital, let the pros handle it, get hospitalized, right? Well, that's how mental health can work as well. So there's lots of other trainings, such as other types of assist is a great one. That's a 2-day training. It's the most intensive that there is. And even post-vention training on how to care for those who have lost individuals to suicide. Youth mental health first aid, that's a great one. Kind of a holistic approach to not just suicide prevention, but the whole auspice of mental health. Safe Talk, that's another good one. And Columbia is used with a lot of school systems now. That is like a follow-up from QPR. Can determine if somebody is suicidal and they have plans, means, motive, intent right now, or it was just a passing thought a year ago. So it gives you a tool to determine how the condition of someone right now. So those are some of our main training that we do. And ACEs, lastly, that's a great one. The adverse childhood experiences, learning how like bullying affects mental health, poor home life, parents who struggle with addiction, things of that nature. There's a lot of ways that you can take that training and build upon your faith. Here's some resources. I mentioned the text 741-741 with the words TN. You have the mobile crisis 855 crisis 1. That's like a mental health triage that in some cases, if there's resources, could come out to you. I wouldn't hold my breath. In a lot of cases with some of our more rural counties, it's very difficult. And then you've got the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK. That is now 988. So when you call 988, it goes to this number. So you don't have to memorize this long number. If you're feeling overwhelmed, you're talking to your friend, and they're like, I'm really sad, I want to take my own life. Boom, you can dial 988 and make an impact. We have other resources. We use the American Association of Suicidology a lot. We're partnered with the Department of Health, for our mental health substance abuse, and the CDC to get our data. You can connect with us. If you want to connect with us on social media, we would love that. Facebook, Instagram, that's the ones we have the biggest following on. So we would love to connect with you, to engage, find out what's going on. And I appreciate your attentiveness. It's probably uncomfortable to hear some of the data. It was uncomfortable to talk about this subject. But maybe we scrubbed off a little bit of that stigma tonight. Maybe we realize that we're in this together, right? So we're going to have a few words, Tucker's mom, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. And I would ask that this is a safe place tonight. Any question you want to ask, period, no matter how uncomfortable, how embarrassing, ask any question. This is the time for it. If I can't answer, I may lean on one of my community partners that I brought with me, but my hope is that we could have a dialogue. Even if it's not a question, if there's something you want to share, almost like a musing, well, why this, why that, this is the place for it tonight. And even if you want to ask it, but you're just like, I can't ask that, maybe just write it on a piece of paper and somehow pass it up front. All right? Thank you.
The children's service mic. Da 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 da. So this is Tucker's mom, also known as Amanda Watts, good friend of mine, and incredibly impressive how you have relied on God, the church, your family, everyone during just unimaginable suffering. But I've asked her here today to speak from the heart, whatever she wanted to say at this time. And so if you would please just listen.
I will try to make it through this without crying. I cried all morning typing this up. It has taken me a month to figure out what I wanted to say. There's still plenty more to be said, but this is what I came up with today. A couple weeks ago, Mark sent me and my husband a quote by Anne Morrow Lindbergh, and it really hit home. It said, "I do not believe that sheer suffering teaches. If suffering alone taught, all the world would be wise, since everyone suffers. To suffering must be added mourning, understanding, patience, love, openness, and the willingness to remain vulnerable. All these and other factors combined, if the circumstances are right, can teach and can lead to rebirth. So in my suffering, mourning, and vulnerability, may you see the start of my rebirth." I had Tucker when I was 18 years old. For 16 years, I loved him, and in many ways, I grew up with him. He was kind, loving, athletic, and funny. He could watch a movie or TV show one time and come away quoting lines from it. I never knew how he did it. I was always kind of jealous of that fact because I never could. I had to watch something 50,000 times before I could memorize it. He never missed a chance to insert "that's what she said" into any conversation. If you know him, you know. He was the sweetest big brother you could ever imagine, and in his sister's eyes, he hung the moon. He was always our source of comic relief and could always make me laugh with his random thoughts and antics. So it was easy to miss the signs. The signs that he was hurting, the signs that he needed help, the signs that he was simply putting on a mask to hide his real emotions. We don't actually know how long he had been suffering in silence. We only found out about his 2 previous suicide attempts after the detective searched his phone. Those dates are just as ingrained in my mind as the day I actually found him dead. The first was December 2nd, 2021. The second was just a couple weeks later, on December 17th, a week before Christmas, when everybody should be happy. He wasn't. The hardest part about knowing those dates is the message that was saved on his phone from the 17th. It was a conversation he had had with a young lady that he knew from school. It was his cry for help that we never saw until it was too late. It simply said, "I'm going to be honest. I wish my mom would have walked in and found the gun and gotten me the help I needed." Knowing now what I didn't know then brings me to 2 simple points that I want to make. The first is for anybody who might be in a dark place and maybe feeling like life isn't worth living. Use your words. When you have a small child that's learning to talk, they usually would rather just point and grunt at what they want. I would usually find myself saying, "Use your words and tell me what you want." If we had only known that Tucker was hurting and wanted help, we would have moved mountains to get him that help. I would have curled up in his bed at 16 years old every single night if I had known that it would have kept him safe. So please talk. Talk to a parent, a friend, a teacher, a pastor, a cousin, or whoever you feel like you can talk to about hard things. The words themselves are simple to say, but the action of saying them out loud can be daunting. It reminds me of a quote from the movie We Bought a Zoo. It says, sometimes all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage. Just literally 20 seconds of embarrassing bravery. And I promise you, something great will come of it. The words, "I need help," are easy. They're easy to say, they're easy to read, they're easy to spell. That is, until you're admitting that you can't fight a battle on your own. Many times people feel like they are a burden, or the world would be better off without them. So saying even the simplest of words seem like a waste of time. Please find that courage and that embarrassing bravery to say the words. Had Tucker simply asked for help out loud, there's a chance I wouldn't be standing here today talking to you all. The second point is for any parent, teacher, friend, pastor, or anyone in a position of being a confidant. Be prepared. As I said a minute ago, Tucker had confided in a young lady that he had previously attempted suicide. Let it be known we hold no anger towards her. But nevertheless, we can't help but sometimes wonder, what if she had told us? She's a 16-year-old that thought she was doing the right thing by not betraying his friendship. And how many of us would likely have done the same thing at that age? So I say to be prepared. Be prepared to have some hard conversations. Knowing what to say when someone is considering suicide is incredibly important. It's also one time when I would say it's definitely okay to betray their trust and tell someone if you are not in a place to get them the help needed. In the past 5 months, I've repeatedly made one statement in particular. Nobody. No mom, no dad, no sibling, no family member, no friend, absolutely nobody should ever have to see the scene that my husband and I saw back in March. Those images are forever ingrained in our minds, and no amount of time or happy images of Tucker will ever fully erase them. There is not a day that goes by that we don't think about him and miss him. His absence in our lives and in our homes has forever changed us, and we still struggle daily with the what ifs, the whys, and the guilt. This isn't something that just affects teens, as Chris said. Anyone at any age can struggle with thoughts of suicide. And please know that no matter what you are going through, no matter how hard life is, no matter how worthless you may feel, you are loved. Your presence in this world is valued by more people than you could ever possibly imagine. Please stay. Use your words. Talk for Tucker.
If you want to come back up here, we are so proud of you, Amanda. Whew. I'm going to turn it back over to Chris, and we'll do our Q&A time. And as he said earlier, any question, ask it. And if you'll raise your hand, I'll actually bring you the microphone so everyone can hear you.
And at the end, there's a lot of resources. Sometimes I see people going up to the table like, I don't want anyone to think I'm struggling, but don't feel like that tonight. You get whatever you want off the table. Got some magnets, brochures, all sorts of stuff. So I want to throw that out there. Who's going to get the ball rolling? First question of the night.
Hi, I'm Ellen Peach, and thank you. Oh my gosh, my heart's still pounding. One thing you said is that it's of all ages, and I'd like to focus now on our grandparents. I'd like to focus on the fact that there are lots of gray heads in the church, and I'd like to focus on the fact that 12% of our nation is over 65, but they represent almost 20% of completed suicides. And one of the reasons that they complete is because their planning is so good. And so we have both youth, but we also have grannies like me. And I'm looking around at other gray heads, and also some who would be gray if they didn't do something else with it, like me. But would you like to say something about elder suicide?
Thank you for bringing that up. Statistically, the number one trigger why elder suicide exists is burden. Oh, I'm a burden to my family. I've got terminal cancer. I don't want them to be financially strapped. I don't want them to adjust their life to take care of me. I've lived a good life. I don't want to be a burden. It's really sad. And that's often what we find as one of the triggers there. So, being the bridge, what can the church do to lift that burden? Care for the orphans and widows. And maybe allow that dialogue to exist. To have a safe place for a grandma to talk about that she's struggling with suicidal ideation. Get some resources in her hand. Maybe a small group, a support group can form and make a place to where that's an okay discussion point at the table.
I know you hate microphones.
No, I don't. Why do people not realize that they're going to be more of a burden if they commit suicide than they are in their present existence?
That's a deep one. Historically, a lot of society and a lot of the church would view someone who dies by suicide as the epitome of a selfish act. And it's followed with, well, why couldn't they, your exact question, why couldn't they perceive the future? So if we dig a little deeper, someone who does take their own life is entrenched in hopelessness. So hopelessness is typically what is present, maybe in pockets of their life, maybe financial hopelessness or relationship hopelessness, physical health hopelessness. And often when someone is in such a state of hopelessness, seeing clearly and thinking about others, they almost see it as they're helping their family because they see themselves in such a terrible negative light, such a self-loathing light, that they almost view it that they're doing a good thing. So it's a narrative almost turned on its head. You've got the hopelessness piece in whatever area of their lives or areas of their lives, coupled with the inherent self-loathing view of they're not worth being around anymore. So there's a lot of complication on tracking with what's going on in a person's head that is suicidal. It's often more than we as an individual person could bear. That's why it's so important to build support systems, a network, that net with smaller squares, and leaning on others. But that's a really hard question, and the greater answer will come when there's more dialogue. When we talk about it more in the church, we can peel back that layer and see and understand the struggle more. Yes, ma'am.
To go into, are you allowed to go into like the high schools and speak, or is that something that
Yes and no, and that's a complicated issue. And my buddy Sarah in the back, she does a lot of that. How easy, Sarah, is it to get into schools and talk to them about mental health? Is it super easy, or is it a challenge?
So I will say in McMinn County, we're in Rogers Creek. I think that's the only school that we are in McMinn County. Part of that is because of the stigma thing we were just talking about. As much as we are super passionate and maybe very persistent sometimes, if we don't have an advocate in the school who really, really, really wants us there, unfortunately, there are a lot of barriers that do exist. So at the end of the day, it is going to matter who is in the school, what role do they have, and do they have a strong enough role to where they can convince the people who are making those decisions to allow us to come in and give that mental health education to the students.
Thank you. And earlier at the end of the year, I was asked to speak at a high school in a different county. Big promotion. The principal sent out emails to everyone, and you know how many kids and parents showed up? 0. Stigma exists. I'm telling y'all, in the South, we got some stigma. So, if it was up to me, every school from elementary up should have suicide prevention educators, trainers. My wife's a school teacher, and they don't support them enough on training, honestly. So if I sound a little jaded, I don't mean to, but it's way harder to get into schools than it should be. I'll just say that. Like, they should be, my whole job should be nothing but going into schools and speaking, honestly. It's very hard to get into schools. So okay, we're opening the can of worms on this one. So
I think she wants you to name names.
I ain't doing that. So you've got how a school board is structured. There's often autonomy with principals. You know, principals can approve or deny what programs are done or not done. You can have support from the school board. Then you've got, on the personal level, I mean, let me be a little honest here. I had a different county, not McMinn. McMinn's pretty awesome compared to a lot of other counties. I had a county around here told me, we don't have a problem. We don't need you. I'm serious. And they have the highest rate of suicide deaths in my region. Not the highest quantity, the highest rate. And he told me that they don't have a problem in their schools. I don't know what to do with such an attitude, but I know it's entrenched in stigma and the myth, if we talk about it, it's going to get worse. It's not how it works. People are thinking about suicide whether we talk about it or not. So, like Sarah said, persistence. But we do have a little bit of a back door that Deidre, on something they've done really well with Northside Neighborhood. It's a local nonprofit in Hamilton County that works specifically at schools that have after-school programs. So they're loving on kids but they're also forward thinking on the mental health piece. Could you share on how that partnership is currently playing out a little bit?
So we have a nonprofit that's called Be the Change Youth Initiative. Our family spent most of 2019 on the road. I have a son. Sydney is my daughter here. She's the oldest. She actually started Be the Change. I have a son who's 18 now, but he's struggled with depression for 2 years, starting at 12. He then started to have suicidal ideation at 14. And we did not know what to do. And we had an opportunity through our nonprofit to work with Make-A-Wish. And so we spent what we thought was going to be a few months on the road until Sydney and Braden had a show in Austin, Texas, and Braden shared a story in a song that he wrote. And that led to us spending a year on the road. And what kids shared with us during that 11 months, we traveled 42 states, 25,000 miles. Literally every day we were meeting with people just to talk about youth mental health. And what kids said to us was that we need real community. We need real friendships. We need real community and no more social media. And so what we did when we got into Chattanooga is we said, how do we create community? And so we partner with an organization in Hamilton County, like Chris said, that has an after-school program. So they invite us in. And so one of the things that we do is we bring in artists in our community, and they share their art with these kids. And one of the components is they share how they use their art to process their mental health. And we're partnering with these guys to bring in mental health resources, and we're creating opportunity for these kids to use their gifts to serve their community. They're creating art that's going to be auctioned off, that's going to create scholarships for kids in their community to do art in the summer who couldn't afford it. Because we've seen that there is such a positive correlation between showing kids their purpose and creating opportunity to use their gifts to help their community. But like Chris and Sarah said, it is so incredibly difficult to get into a school system through the normal channels of a school board. What's been helpful for us is developing these relationships and then figuring out ways to kind of circumvent that and get into the schools. You can find an administrator in every school that is a proponent for mental health advocacy, I promise you. So it's just trying to find those relationships and then create opportunities.
Thanks, Deidre. Yes, ma'am.
So I just wanted to ask a question, I guess, if you could kind of talk about it in a way. So as someone who has struggled with depression, I also have severe anxiety and OCD. And the OCD isn't the neat freak OCD. It's the OCD. It makes you so sick you can't even clean your room. So I think often, like when people talk about suicide, they think it's like linked only to depression, which is very real. That's majority of suicides, I would assume. But I also, a lot of my ideation has came from anxiety and wanting to get rid of like those horrible obsessive compulsive behaviors. So, and some of the thoughts were very graphic and disturbing. So how do we talk about that? Because it's so taboo, I feel like, especially OCD.
That's a tough issue, and I'm glad that you shared. One issue, if you're feeling overwhelmed or incapable of managing your own mental health, is getting help, getting a therapist. That act in itself is a taboo in the church, right? Well, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to, I'm like broken if I get a therapist, right? So I think that is a huge taboo that we can start to whittle down, that it's okay to be a believer in Christ and it's okay to get therapy. What that can do is reduce the burdensome on yourself having to have everything figured out. And when those intrusive thoughts hit, you have a support system. So looking at a personal safety plan, okay, I've got maybe a regular therapist. Maybe I have some close family friends that I can talk about. I have put a plan together if things get really bad. What can I do? Of planning before the worst days hit. So it's being forward thinking when you're calm and not in such a heightened emotional state that you can help mitigate that. Lynn, do you have anything you'd like to add on that? I hate to put you on the spot.
So thanks for your openness and your honesty and authenticity. But I would say just get some professional help so that, like Chris said, you have factors in place when you're in a calm state for when you need it.
Thanks, Lynn. Yes, ma'am.
Speaking of therapists, anyone in this church, there's mental health in my husband's family, and we deal with it on a daily basis. There is a very shortage of mental health. There is a very shortage of mental health in East Tennessee. It's hard to get a therapist. Yeah. It's hard to get that appointment. So is there anything being done by the state to encourage maybe to get more people to go into that field, or is to, get maybe recruit people to come to this area? Because, I know people that are struggling, but they can't get an appointment. It's just so hard because of the shortage of mental health in our region.
Yeah, that's a huge challenge in rural counties. That's what links every rural county in Tennessee, disparity of care. And then you have long wait times to get into awesome therapists. Well, they're booked for such a long time. So there is a trend on online counseling, virtual counseling. There's a lot of websites that are becoming very normalized. So the virtual piece is definitely being pushed nationally. At the state, I can't say there's some huge press on getting more licensed therapists in to the degree that there should or could be. Like the VA, they're struggling with a similar thing, and they're really trying to push the online care to mitigate rural counties around all their facilities nationwide. So that's a problem that is a challenge. So another way around it is drive time. Drive into Chattanooga or Knoxville. Not that that's a great solution, because that's a long drive, but that's one of our challenges. That there's not a great solution to it now, but I know that's a narrative that's talked about all the time. So I'm glad you brought that up, but I would look into expand your radius of drive time and then look at online counseling options as well.
Scotty, to address your point, that was one of my first questions. Why? We're such a close-knit family. Why on earth would Tucker do this? The point is, he wasn't thinking. All he could think about was how long he had suffered. We had also listened to another mental health talk not long after he had passed, and he said a trend sometimes that you'll see is these individuals will perk up a little bit before they pass, but it's because they know their suffering is close to ending. That day, it was a normal Sunday at the golf course. He and Mac had gone out, done their little couple of hour golf cart extravaganza. We never knew what they did, but they were out having their own time. He was his normal self, and he said to her, "I wish we could do this all the time." Of course, Mackenzie thought nothing of it and said, "We can." It was always, every Sunday when he left, when Amanda had him, he would always tell each of us bye in his own little way. Sometimes it was a half-hearted hug. Tucker wasn't really a touchy person, but he was sure to tell you bye, and he loved you. He made a point that night to tell every single family member bye. It wasn't just, "I love you," it was bye. That call I got from my mom, I will never forget. So to answer that, the guy also said it's more of a selfless act. They They don't think about harming everybody else. They see that their suffering is super close to ending, and they don't think about that. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in hearing people talk to you from heaven until Tucker passed. Tucker doesn't shut up. Tucker talks to all of us often. One thing he said, had he known what he has caused for us here, he would have never done it. He had no idea the impact he would make on us here. There was something else. I was sitting here thinking, oh, as somebody that suffers with depression, anxiety, I am brave enough to stand and say I suffer from suicidal ideations. I have never acted on them. I'm very open with my therapist about that. I do telehealth with a lady in Cleveland. I'm happy to give you her number before I leave. I struggled at that. I called numerous people in Athens. Nobody's open. They're booked out. They won't see me. I branched out. I'm seeing somebody in Cleveland. I have a super close friend that battles with these same things. She is now in the counseling that she needs and has seen positive things from that. Be brave enough to admit it. It hurts nothing to say, I struggle with those thoughts. It doesn't change who I am. I'm being honest. I'm letting somebody else know. Maybe we should check up on her every now and again. I've struggled with these things since I was in high school. And as somebody also who struggled with them, the things that I said, I promise you, I wasn't thinking about my family. But be brave enough to say it, guys. It's like saying, I hurt myself, or I don't know, just it's words. It's just words. And I don't think anybody is going to judge you for that. To say, I'm depressed, I need help, I have thoughts of not wanting to be here. Tell your friends that. It's okay. I would give anything for Tuck to call me right now and say, Bam, let's have a hard talk. I kick myself in the rear a lot for these two that I still have here right now. I never had hard talks with Tuck. I had hard talks with them, and somehow Tucker slipped through my fingers. I'd give anything to have him back, to have a hard talk, to let him know it's okay, it's normal. Don't be afraid to do that stuff, okay? I think another thing, this is just a question or a statement to you. I think guys in general struggle because they're supposed to be this macho, man of the house type deal. I think it's scary too for them to come forward and say, I have a weakness. Christian background, I think it's just as scary. The parents might not take it serious. It's like, we'll just go talk to your pastor. I'm sure that these thoughts are nothing. So I think some of it too is parents maybe brushing it off and not realizing the severity. And I'm not saying that was the case here. Tucker never once came up, but I think making parents more aware too of they're not kidding. It's not a joke. It's not a trend. It's not. They're not. It may be a cry for attention, but we got to take it serious.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have heard my husband's family. I commend this family for being so open and so honest, because he had so many issues as a kid after his mom committed suicide because it was swept under the table. So y'all taking that stigma and putting it aside and being honest is huge for people who have gone through it and was not allowed to say that word, suicide.
I don't need that. I got a loud mouth. What a injustice in our school system that you can't get in there to these children who may need that, who may need that help. That's wrong in every way you look at it. I mean, you are a state program that needs to be in our schools, and you are hitting roadblock after roadblock. That's wrong. That is wrong in every way you look at it, and that's a shame. Having worked in state government for 30 years, I can say that.
I'll leave it at that.
currently as an employee of the McMinn County School System, I want to know, this has been viewed that we don't do anything, and that's not true. Everybody that's employed in the school system has a minimum of 2 hours of suicide prevention training every year. Down to cooks, substitute cooks. All those have to have that minimum 2 hours, plus hours of bullying, plus hours of human trafficking, all those things that kind of feed in together. So I don't want people to leave here and think the schools are negligent. So that's a little frustrating. I think you all have great programs, but I think the schools are trying to do what they can do.
And I don't mean to speak.
Because they're the smallest.
So the Jason Foundation, they're an amazing organization. Teachers, well, I was a teacher, and it's a very common trend to use the Jason Foundation video module course as their base foundation, which I think every new teacher 100% should go through that video module series. It is awesome, and it is very helpful. The conundrum is seasoned teachers looping the video series. They'll often not engage because they've seen the training so much. They already know it. But the school systems are doing a great job at mandating. Teachers have to upload proof that they've went through that training. You're exactly right. It's mandated, the legislation. So teachers are required to do that training. The challenge, I think, is sharpening the tool. It's like repeating kindergarten over and over if you've done it once. When I interview teachers, they're like, yeah, I know this module like the back of my hand. And even QPR, if you do QPR only every time, so that having a plethora of programs to choose from, just like in the way school system is tiered. You go through kindergarten, through 12th grade. So I think a model, or having a national down to state, down to county level support of ways that teachers could sharpen their tools. Frankly, teachers don't have time. My wife's a teacher. She's way overburdened, and giving them something extra to do, that ain't it. That's super stressful for teachers. They don't have enough time. They work like 50, 60, 80 hours a week. So that's a whole nother can of worms. So expecting it to all fall on teachers, it's an impossible burden too. So that there's a dichotomy of pressure in this dynamic of, we want teachers to be equipped, and we can be mad at the school systems because statistically we can't get in. It's like Fort Knox. But then you can't blame teachers either because they're awesome doing their best. It's a layered issue. It's complex, and I think we're making baby steps in the right direction. But I think that this para support model is really potent, like what Deidre was talking about, of supporting from afar, and then maybe we come in and have deeper relationships with a principal or whoever it needs to be. So it's a complex issue, but it's not that teachers are not untrained. So I don't want that narrative to be out there, but they're not as trained as they could be and supported as much as they could be. So that's kind of the raw, that's how it really is on a day-to-day basis, from my opinion as a teacher spouse.
I think exactly right. Teachers are trained, and I look back so many times, as our whole family has in this situation, is, multiple things we sit back and look at. Number one was, I've never sat back and tried to figure out what the signs were. I haven't been trained for 1 to 2 hours or whatever the training is. I'm not a teacher. So I've never, I say this very naive in the fact that I've never been trained as an aunt how to look at my nephew and have seen any signs. There's nothing that is brought, I shouldn't say there's not anything because you guys have wonderful resources, but up until this point, I had never paid attention to the fact there's not programs where they come into churches, and I'm very fortunate to learn about this, or that things come into schools or parent training that is out there available through the schools to say these are things you look for. As we've said over and over again, I don't know if anybody would have saw Tucker's signs. But I also know that there are kids sitting in this room that spoke and dealt with him every single day, and they probably would not have saw signs. We know they didn't see the obvious signs because, to clarify, the child that he spoke to is not in this room. But they saw him every day. Are they being taught what to look for? Do they know the key words to look for in their friends? So I think maybe that's more what, to clarify and to answer, I think, to tell you, Sarah, why I think maybe what these organizations are doing is you're taking it a step further, not just training the teachers. I think there's a need for organizations to come in, and schools seem to be the easiest way to reach parents, to reach aunts, to teach students. And I'm going to be honest with you, I feel like if there was an open discussion to some of these kids, including Tucker, if there was an open conversation where he had sat in a room and gone through a training that said the things as simple as tell somebody, then I don't know if we'd be sitting here today. I don't know if Tucker would have felt like this was his only hope. I feel like that there are opportunities that these kids all have an opportunity to learn how do they deal when they're overwhelmed. As I have explained to many people, that the way I see it is that we've taught our kids from birth, and you know this in your medical profession, we say, you go to your mom and you say, my ear hurts, or you go to your mom and you say, I don't feel good, and you say, well, where do you feel bad? Well, my ear hurts, my foot hurts, whatever. And kids do not know, adults, not even say kids, adults do not know how to communicate. They feel like they have to be able to go into the doctor's office and say, I'm mentally disturbed. Well, who wants to walk into a doctor's office and say, I'm mentally disturbed? They feel that is, I'm crazy. And they're not crazy. And we have set a stigma out there that mental health does make you crazy. And if Tucker had heard, if you wake up, and I told these kids this the day after this all happened, we sat and shared all kinds of funny stories. And I said to them, because I'm someone that deals with this and no one would know this, is that, everybody looks at me and says, oh, you're a happy person, you blah, blah, blah. Well, there are days that I would have to get up before I had to start taking medicine for depression, was that I would get up and say, you have to hug your kids today. You have to smile to people. You have to tell people you love them. You have to be nice. And I knew that was a problem because our dad had suffered depression. And so I was alert to that. It is not something we talk about often. There's a very good chance that's what Tucker struggled with, but he thought something was wrong with him and that there was no way to get out of that deep, dark hole that he was in. So I think we need ways to teach kids that there's this world in here that there's a way to overcome. And so I think we need to teach kids this is normal. It's okay to feel this way, and there's hope and there's help for this. Sometimes we just need to talk about it. I also think, and this was going to be my question, but to build on what I think probably that's what y'all's programs do, is take it to the next level of let's go further than teachers, because you're right, teachers can't do it all. Tucker wasn't going to walk into his classroom and talk to his teacher about this problem. So my next, he wouldn't talk, Tucker didn't talk to anybody about anything. But anyway, but what brought on my question that I was going to ask is, and this may come to the back of the room, is I go through my mind often of if I had been the other person on the message that Tucker did talk to, if I had someone that, came to me today, if I had somebody that called me at 11 o'clock tonight and said, Heather, I'm scared, I'm unhappy, I want to harm myself. I know we can text 988, but if I'm not in the room with that person and they're across town and I know that that's where they are, I don't know how to get a hold of their parent, because I go through my mind over and over again of what if Tucker had that night called someone and said, I'm scared, I don't know what to do, I have a gun in my hand and I'm about to do something. What are the words you say? Like, what are the first steps you take to do everything you can to stop it right at that moment? Because in my mind, I say, if I had said, I'm calling 911, we know probably what would have happened. And so I just wonder, is there a way that we can tell people in this room, if you're ever in that situation, like, what's the first word you say? Because I say to people all the time, I have no idea what I would have said if I had been the other person that he talked to all those times, or those couple of times. So can you just guide us, just what are some key words that would help us just a little bit to get us to the next level, to get them talking to the right people?
You dropped a lot right there. Number one, when you're dealing with grief, you got an invisible backpack on. Those big grief boulders get heavy. Reflect, you wearing the backpack. Take those boulders out. Romans 8, therefore there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ. It's not your fault. What if and why are they can become plagues and poison if we let it. It's not your fault. Period. Reflect on that. The God of all compassion. It's not your fault. That's the baseline. Because you ain't alone. There's been so many family, friends, parents who have lost loved ones to suicide, and it's always what if and why. If I'd have known, I could have done. That's why training can hurt. If you try to get training and you're not healed yet, it'll drudge up all these feelings and you'll feel guilty. It's called survivor's guilt. And it's okay. It's in this room a little bit, and that's okay. It's a very natural process. That's number one. That's the foundation while we're all healing through this together. Number two, when you're now caring about suicide prevention, you don't have to suddenly become a masterful suicide interventionalist. Even those of us who are seasoned at interventions still can send a chill down our spine. I talk with my battalion chaplain a lot when we do interventions with soldiers, and we did we do that right? Well, did we miss this? That you don't have to be that. That's why 988 exists. That's why texting 741-741 exists. That's why there's counselors. So bearing that weight of having to figure it all out and say the perfect word track, it's not how it works. What we can do is increase our protective factors. You have risk factors and protective factors. Maybe parents and friends, they go through some training and they are able to hear some of the signs, some of the subtle verbal cues. Maybe there aren't any. It sounds like in this case there weren't any at all. And that's prevalent. You have coaches, youth pastors, friends, all the support system is in place. Resources readily available. Destigmatizing the whole narrative. See, it's a collective approach. It's not one person's responsibility or ability to handle the next person who has intense suicide ideation. So take that burden off. You don't have to have it all figured out yourself, but it's all this collaborative approach that we keep building these blocks on piece by piece. So that's all I would say. When you go through a training, you'll start to hear some things. But does that help in answering?
We don't have time for any more questions, but you wanted to add something, I'm guessing, right?
There are a couple things I want to say. First, when it comes to training our teachers, some of the training across the country is outdated, but we live in a post-COVID society, and things have changed because of COVID. And I just want to give you an example really fast. When we talk to teachers, they say before COVID, one of the biggest problems that they were having with their students was just to get them to be nice to one another on social media. So like if you wouldn't say this to a person's face, please don't put it on social media. That was the resounding message. Post-COVID, after everything that kind of happened in 2020, especially on social media, whether, a lot of different things happened in our country, that was no longer the problem, because what people were once saying on social media but wouldn't say to their face, people were saying it to their face now. It has become a harsh reality that we work a lot in Hamilton County. I have teachers all the time say to us that they say mean things to their peers, but they also say horrible things to the teachers. And there are very little repercussions. And so the dynamic that we are facing across the board is different. So like that's one thing that we have to take into consideration. Another thing too is like when I think about what your question, what do you say? Like our mission statement is that we want all youth to know that they are seen, heard, and loved. And we went to a TSPN event, the Advisory Council in Nashville last month. And Misty, the executive director, stood up and said they had been the night before to a church who they had lost someone in their community, a teen. And the pastor stood up and said, nothing else except I want every teen right now to know I hear you. I see you. I'm here to listen. Not preach to you, not tell you something that might not resonate. Even kids, my kids grew up in the church. I went to seminary. We were church planners. Our kids, they were like good kids. They still suffer. And I can't sometimes with these kids, if they haven't grown up, they might have grown up in the church, but they have not grown into their faith. And so to throw a scripture at them doesn't help. Like they don't understand. And so we have to walk and shepherd them and love them and see them and not force something on them. We have to be with them in their pain. So I think that that's like the one thing, like I think about it all night. Like Sydney and I were sitting here and we were crying listening to you, Amanda. The grace of the Lord is upon you in such an amazing, profound way. That I have no doubt that the Lord has mighty things for you, because your story, your family story, it needs to be heard. It needs to be heard, because we come across teens and families. Like my kids go into schools. Sydney is 20, Braden is 18. He's a senior. They go into schools and they tell their story. Braden tells his story. Sydney tells her story. She struggles too. Social media, comparison, body dysmorphia. She struggles too. They share it openly. And I cannot tell you every single time, middle school, high school, my kids are bombarded with other students who have attempted suicide, middle school students who have been sexually assaulted. And these are not things that they feel comfortable bringing to the church, their parents, even their peers. So until we create a safe space for them to be seen, loved, and heard, nothing's going to change. And so, yes, maybe we can get into schools. Maybe we can get into churches. Maybe like what the Lord is calling your church to do is to create an event for youth where we can start digging into this. You guys, you might be it. You might be the hope of this area. So through Jesus, right? So I just want to encourage you that if you guys are being this proactive to bring Chris here, that maybe that's the first step.
Thanks, Deidre.
Somebody should tell our youth leader that. Do you have any closing remarks that you want to end with?
Well,
and I'll close us out with a prayer.
Beautiful.
How about that?
Thank you for being in this space together in such a heavy, uncomfortable topic. That speaks volumes about each of you. Lean in together. We're in this together. It's been a blessing to be with you all tonight. You'll be in my prayers, and I hope that healing is continual. Thank you all.
Well said. And I know that there were still some questions that people had. You're going to be around for a few minutes.
Yeah, I'll stay as long as, I don't want to keep you if you need a lockdown. I'll be as long as you want to talk, along with
Okay.
my partners in the back as well. So.
Yes, and we have desserts that I don't want to take home with me, so please make sure these desserts leave the building. If you're still thirsty, we've got plenty of bottles of water. If you want a cup of coffee on the way out, please do that. And let's see. I had something else. Oh yes, the magnets are back here, if and people can just take those for free. Yeah. And can we give a round of applause for Chris being here tonight? What about all the organizational help back here? And of course, all the families who've been affected by suicide over the last year that are here tonight. They're so brave being here. Let's give them a round of applause. And the words of Jesus, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into that harvest. I think it's us. I think that we know that there's something that we need to do. Let's be sure that we're in God's will about it and not waste this opportunity. If you'd pray with me. God, we give you thanks for this night, for bringing us safely together. Lord, it's been an emotional night, and I think it's something that we all needed. God, would you send your Holy Spirit, the Comforter, into the lives of everyone in this room, especially those who are hurting the deepest. And God, for those of us who don't have the deep wounds right now, give us a spirit of bravery and compassion to stand with those who are hurting. Father, help each of us to surrender our own will, committing our lives in service to you to bring about your goodwill on earth. In Christ's name, amen.
You're dismissed.